Hi guys, in our last set of notes on statistics, we are looking at surveys, experiments, and observational studies. This is going to be much more discussion based as well. I'm not going to write a lot on the board, if anything, so you may want to take notes just based on what you hear, but we're going to talk through some of these things. So as we look through here, we have a little more vocab. We talked about biased samples, but biased questions are questions that are flawed in a way that leads to inaccurate results. This is an important thing, that you don't want to ask a question that's going to lead them into answering a certain way. You want to try to ask things in a very unbiased way. So, for example, it says, tell why the question may be biased or otherwise introduce bias into the survey. Describe a way to correct the flaw. So, an automobile salesman asks former customers, were you happy with your car buying experience? Okay, so obviously this is a biased question. It's the salesman asking his own customers, were you happy with how I sold you the car? When somebody puts you on the spot like that, probably not going to answer. Honestly, you're probably going to say, oh yeah, it was great. Whereas if maybe it was an anonymous survey, you might give a different answer. And saying, were you happy, is a leading into them saying, yes, it was a happy experience. Instead of saying, how was your previous car buying experience? So different ways to phrase that, probably asking in a more anonymous manner so that it's not directly from that salesman. All right, two different types of ways to collect information. One is an experiment, one is an observational study. An experiment imposes a treatment on individuals in order to collect data on their responses to the treatment. So you are doing something, you are intentionally changing something for a group of people. An observational study observes individuals and measures variables without controlling the individuals or their environment. You're not changing anything here. You are just seeing how people normally behave and possibly making conclusions about those behaviors. So determine whether each situation is an example of an experiment or an observational study. Explain. So a landscaper fertilizes 15 lawns with his regular fertilizer mix and 15 lawns with extra nitrogen in this fertilizer mix. Then he compares the results. Well, he's actually changing something. He's putting a new chemical into the fertilizer mix. So that's an experiment. He's doing something. Versus, I think there's a question on here, a question that comes up later in your homework about breakfast and comparing what people eat for breakfast. If all you do is observe what they typically eat and what they continue to eat during that study without specifically telling them what to eat, that would be an observational study. Versus if you said, okay, this half of the room, you guys are going to continue to eat breakfast how you normally would. This half of the room, you are going to eat oatmeal and orange juice every morning for breakfast, and we're going to measure both groups' cholesterol levels at the end. That's an experiment because you are controlling, you are changing what one group does. Okay, so a controlled experiment is where two groups are studied under identical conditions with the exception of one variable. So we talked about the breakfast. We could control that. We could make it so that everything was identical, the number of hours of sleep they got, the amount of exercise they got. The only difference was what they ate for breakfast. Control group is that group under ordinary conditions, so their breakfast food doesn't change. The treatment group is the group that is subjected to the treatment. So if you tell them, here's what you're eating, or here is the medicine that you're taking if they're in a trial for a medicine. A randomized comparative experiment, individuals are randomly assigned to the control group or the treatment group, which minimizes bias. So if you're randomly assigning them, you don't know maybe going in if some of them have high cholesterol already. Talking about that example that I gave you before, and that's a way to kind of control some of that bias. All right, so determine whether the study described in the health bulletin below is a randomized comparative study. If it is, describe the treatment group, and the control group. If it's not, explain why not, and discuss whether the conclusions drawn from the study are valid. So, a guitar manufacturer has guitar technicians test nickel-plated stainless steel electric guitar strings by rating their ease of use on a scale from 1 to 10. 40 technicians are randomly divided into two groups. One group uses regular stainless steel electric guitar strings, and one group uses the nickel-plated strings. Users of the nickel-plated strings gave higher ease of use ratings 90% of the time. I would say this is a randomized comparative study because you have two different groups that are being measured, and they were randomly selected. The control group would be the normal strings, the regular stainless steel guitar strings. So that's the control group. The treatment then would be the nickel-plated strings, and the treatment group would be the group that played on those nickel-plated strings. So, since it's a random comparative study, these conclusions would be valid of this study. Alright, so randomization is the key element of a well-designed study. So, sample survey, a random sample is selected to be surveyed from the population studies. So we talked about that you ask people questions to find out how they behave. An observational study, random samples selected for the groups being studied. You're not changing people's behavior. An experiment, you're assigning people at random to a treatment group or control group, and you are telling them how to do certain things, and trying to come up with a conclusion from that. Alright, so note, an observational study can identify correlation between variables, but not causality. Variables other than what is being measured may be affecting the results. So what that means is an observational study can't tell you that if you eat a healthy breakfast every day, for sure that is the reason you have a low cholesterol level versus somebody else that has high cholesterol. It can say there's a correlation here that eating a healthy breakfast, you do have a lower cholesterol, but it's not the thing that causes it. A rigorous randomized comparative experiment, by eliminating sources of variation other than the controlled variable, can make valid cause and effect conclusions possible. So you can say that yes, for sure, that's what causes that to happen. Alright, so I knew this question was here. Explain whether the following research topic is best investigated through an experiment or an observational study. And explain how you would design the experiment or observational study. You want to know if eating oatmeal for breakfast every day will lower a person's cholesterol level. So I would like for you to write out whether you think this is experiment or observational study, and then when you come back to discuss this, I would like to talk through what you guys thought and how you would design this experiment or study to best get the results that you want, and we'll talk through this in class. So if you have any questions, come in and see me. Otherwise, I will see you in class.